Hey, family, to God be the glory. This is the day that the Lord has made. I trust that you are thoroughly enjoying this anniversary edition, 172 years. Wow, God is amazing. That's a lot of funerals. That's a lot of baptisms. That's a lot of weddings. That shows how faithful God is. Well, welcome to A Moment with Pastor Thomas. With me, I have one of our very, very esteemed members, Miss Debbie Hillman. So glad to have you. Thank you for being with us on today. She's a community activist, a very important person in our community as well as our church, and we're just so excited just to have you here today. And I want to know a little bit about yourself, want to know a little bit about your family. Your family has long-standing roots in this church. Your family's been very instrumental to the development and the growth of this church. So tell us a little bit about the impact that your father and mother have had on this church, and just tell me a little bit about your family as it relates to your family roots in this church.
Thank you, Pastor. My father was the former chairman of the deacon board here at Bethlehem and loved this church. My mother was active in the choir, the Sunday school, the missionary society, the ward, you name it, we did it.
Wow.
And as children, I remember my brother and I coming to missionary society meeting on Tuesday afternoons. We were the only children, but we grew up with that part of the church. I remember when they joined, my mother came here from another church in the community that she did not feel was as progressive as Bethlehem. And so they joined at a time when services were held on second and fourth Sundays. And so at that time, I guess people came here for second and fourth, and first and third, they went to the other church.
Wow.
That's why we had our communion services on second Sunday, whereas everybody else was having it on first.
Wow.
All we knew was second Sunday.
Amazing.
And so they were very involved in the community. In addition to being here, my mother retired as an educator, but what she said was she retired so that she could work.
Wow.
So fortunately, she never had to go back to a job, but she volunteered at the hospital on Friday mornings and actually established a scholarship in her name at the hospital.
Wow.
Because of her involvement there. My father was building and ground superintendent at Gammon Theological Seminary, which is part of the ITC. And as a result of that, that gave him connections with a number of people in the ministry.
Wow.
In fact, one of the things I've said to you before is that he was actually instrumental in bringing Reverend Benton to Bethlehem.
Yes, he was.
On Sundays when our Pastor Mitchell was out of town or something, my father was the one who would often identify one of the students from the seminary to come down and preach. And when Reverend Mitchell decided to retire, one of the things that he said was that he would not leave the church uncovered.
Wow.
And wanted to make sure that we had a new pastor. And so that was when Reverend Benton became a pastor.
Wow.
Here at Bethlehem.
And the rest was history.
And the rest was history.
Wow. Wow.
So a lot of the things that we were able to do here at the church, they were involved in. And I remember those old days of selling ice cream right up next door on the Hammond's driveway. I remember selling candy apples. Of course, there were the Krispy Kreme donut sales. In fact, I remember when Reverend Mitchell and his wife, Dr. Addie Mitchell, would stop by, pick up donuts, and bring them with them on Sunday morning.
Wow.
That was sold to people. Of course, there were the Saturday chicken dinners, and being just very actively engaged in ensuring that we were able to get the things that we needed. I remember as a child going to Camp John Hope, which was the Baptist girl camp. And so my parents were involved in all of that at the church and beyond.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing. You have a very rich family tradition that's here. And in fact, when we have visitors and those members already know that this window here, it is what's the third window from the wall. It has your father's name and your mother's name engraved in there. Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. And to God be the glory that you've been able to carry on that torch and just picking up right where they left off, or rather continuing the work that they have entrusted you with. And it's just been amazing to have you as a part of our ministry to continue that, to remember the work that they have done, and then to continue the work that they have done.
Yes, one of the things that I had the pleasure of starting a few years ago was to sort of spearhead the church anniversary. And so one of the things that we did each year was to try to find some creative way, because I remember the times when we went to other churches and someone would stand up and read the church history.
Oh, wow.
And so the people from that congregation obviously enjoyed it, but everybody else was just sort of sitting there. And so I remember we started saying, I don't think the church anniversary is the best time to bring in visiting churches. That if it's our celebration, then we should celebrate. And so we sort of revisited the church history, the writing of the church history. We looked at it through the eyes of different pastors.
Wow.
Because Bethlehem is just really rich in knowing that in 172 years, we can name the pastors that we've had.
That's amazing.
Some people can't name the pastors they've had in the last 20 years or less.
Right.
But being able to pull together that information, being able to look at the windows here in the church and know for whom those windows were named.
What a joy that is.
That is truly something that combines the old and the new. The history, the tradition, and the newness of God, and all that He would have us do.
Wow. So let's talk about, since you've been a long-time member of the church, this is the only church that you have been a part of. And so let's talk about, or I'd like to hear from a person who's been here, for their entire life, how would you say the church has changed with the times? As times, nothing stays the same, but as time has gone on, talk about the progression of the church from when you and your family first came and to where it is now, and to, where you see it going in the future.
Well, one of the things that I believe makes Bethlehem is the fact that there are very few churches that are 172 years old that can say that they have had fewer than 20 pastors.
That's amazing.
I mean, there's some people who, pastor changed pastors.
That's amazing.
And so the fact that we have had fewer than 20 pastors.
Wow.
That a few years ago I had an opportunity to work with the late Carolyn Hardeman in writing the history of the church. And one of the things that we did was to look at what we accomplished through the eyes of all those pastors. To be able to say that one pastor brought us to this building. I remember as a little girl when we added the educational wing.
Wow.
And so when I look at the cornerstone here at the church, I can say, yep, I know him, 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 him.
Wow.
I remember the late Claudia Hardwick, who gave us the first church organ.
Wow. Wow.
You know, who said, okay, here you go. And we paid her back for that. I remember being in the meeting when we decided to purchase the church house at the hill, on the hill, like, okay, so we're going to do this. More recently, one of the things that I remember is that in serving on the pastoral search committee, one of the things that we did was to put together a list of characteristics that we wanted, a list of attributes. And one of those attributes was to look for someone who, one, loved children, who was willing to incorporate children into this mission, and two, someone who was appreciative and familiar with technology. And so as we started to formulate the questions to ask during the interview, those questions were included.
Wow.
And so as we thought about the technology piece, I say, and I've said it over and over again since COVID, that God sent you here
Wow.
because he gave us the questions to ask.
Wow.
He gave us the questions. He gave you the answers.
Wow.
And as a result, I remember the Sunday when you said, okay, we are going to go live.
God be the glory.
And that was before COVID.
Right.
You know,
Right.
like we are going to start making some adjustments because we want to go live. And so I also remember the Sunday when you said, okay, we are going to put in new cameras. We are putting in state-of-the-art equipment, not knowing anything about COVID
Right.
at that time.
God be praised.
But when COVID hit and other churches were struggling and trying to figure out how to continue, we didn't miss a beat.
Right. Praise God.
And we didn't miss a beat because God has given us everything we needed to move forward. And so as I think about, I was talking with someone the other day about the time when people just came to church and trusted the pastor. And so if the pastor said something, and I remember an experience when I was in college in South Carolina. My soror and I went to church, and the pastor was preaching, and when he took his text, she and I had a Bible. So after service, we said to her father, that's not in there, in that place, because there's no such place in the Bible.
Wow.
So her father, being who he was, called the pastor.
Oh my goodness.
Said, my daughter and her friends said, that's not in there, so you need to find it.
Yeah.
Well, this man was probably functionally illiterate.
Okay.
So, you know, somebody told him that's
Right.
where it was, so he told us. And I'm sure it was in the Bible somewhere, but it certainly was not there
Just
where
not
he
there.
said. No. But, so one of the things that Pastor Benton brought was Monday night Bible study.
Wow.
And people went from coming to church empty-handed and believing whatever the pastor said was in the Bible to studying for themselves.
Oh, God.
And so we, you know, so Bible study continued. Well, because of technology, while some people over the last few months have called on a telephone and talked about what was in, we were able to actually look at a live discussion.
Praise God.
And we were able to continue. So one of the things that I can say about Bethlehem's history is that we have mixed tradition and newness.
Wow. That's amazing.
So I remember with our summer feeding and enrichment program,
Yes. Yes.
you know, that came out of the spirit of a couple of people with Pastor Benton. And at that time, there were teachers throughout the county who, each week of summer feeding, would come in, and somebody might do culture. Somebody else might focus on English or math. And it grew and continued to grow.
Wow.
And over the last few years, my sorority chapter was able to come in, and we created a reading room.
Give the chapter a shout out.
Chi Tau Omega. Hey, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated.
Gotcha.
Yes. So we were able to bring in that piece. I can remember the bus ministry
Wow.
that came along with. I remember Johnny Freeman saying to the youth as he picked them up for summer feeding, saying, if I can pick you up for summer feeding, I can pick you up for church.
That's true.
So he started picking them up on Sunday mornings for church. They became engaged in the dance ministry and the choir ministry, and you know, they were on program when we needed them. And as a result, one of them actually became Miss Fort Valley State University.
Yes, she did. Yes,
And
she
so I think that, and members surrounded her.
did.
And I've seen that. I've seen people who, you know, our church was probably the first black church to start doing educational scholarships.
Wow.
So every year when they did scholarships, they said Bethlehem Baptist Church and scholarships were given to all of the young people who were headed to college.
Amazing.
When my father passed away and we were trying to figure out how to honor his legacy, what we did was to start the Garland Hillman Scholarship. And the scholarship went to students who were graduating and members of Bethlehem.
Wow.
And so, and then we started to encourage others to do the same thing, because all those flowers that they bring you at the funeral home die. But if you can plant something in the mind of a child,
Right.
then that lives on.
It lives on. It lives on. Yes, it does. It does. Well, we thank you so much. You are an inspiration to our church, number one, but certainly you're an inspiration to the community. And we're just so godly proud that you are, in fact, a faithful member of our church, and that we can brag and say that you are a member of this church. And so I just want to say, and I want to say to you, what I say publicly, what I say privately, thank you for your work in the community, the impact that you have in the community, the reach that you have in the community that you bring to our church. And I want to say thank you as pastor. Thank you for the work. Keep up the great work. God has great things in store for you. Thank you for this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Miss Hillman, everybody. Appreciate it.
My mother told us at an early age, because we asked about Bethlehem and the beginning of Bethlehem, and she always talked about the grape arbor, which was on this property, and how Mr. Tony Baker and those with him would have church out on the grounds under the grape arbor. But before that happened, there was a group of congregants, a group of people who were members, who became members of this church, who were worshiping, or they were attending the white church, which was a Baptist church, a white church here in Covington. And that church at the time was called Bethlehem Baptist Church. Those members, those people who attended that church, after a time, wanted to have their own place of worship. And we were told that that is when this land that this church sits on now was donated to that group, were donated to Mr. Tony Baker, Reverend Tony Baker, and those others who were with him, those other men who were with him. There was no building or structure on this land. I was told that the church was built after they received the land, sometime afterward, because they held service outdoors near or under the great arbor. And also, I was told that at the time that the church was built, it was a wooden building. I know that for a fact because I saw this structure before, what was here before it was bricked. And at that time, they named the church Little Bethlehem, coming from the other church, the white church. I was also told that when that happened, that the white church changed their name from Bethlehem Baptist Church to the First Baptist Church of Covington, Georgia. I've always been told that that is where this church came out of because there were people who attended who had a place, designated place, probably in the back of the church, that they went to the white church. Now, I have no information concerned that I can give you that was written, but that was word of mouth. That was the oral tradition that we were told the history and other things about the history of this great church. Also, during the time that these different preachers were coming and going over time, one of the preachers who came was Reverend Joel King, who was the uncle of Martin Luther King Jr. And through that time that he was with this church, a relationship was formed with the King family. And during the time that I was a teenager, under the leadership of Reverend C.W. Huff, we were given a trip, a group of us. It was a group from the Baptist Training Union. We were given a trip to Atlanta. There were about 6 of us, young people. Miss Georgia Hatcher was our leader, and she was our chaperone. She took us to Atlanta, and we went to the King home. We met Martin Luther King's mother, and we also met his aunt. And there were a couple of other ladies that I do not remember who they were. At the time we were there, they said that we wanted you to meet Martin, but Martin is out because he's out doing oratory. Well, I really didn't know who Martin was, but the purpose of the trip was to have us to be familiar with the King family and with what they stood for. Little did I know that Martin Luther King would be the great man that he became. We were there. We went on a Friday. We were there overnight. Half of us were at the King home, and half of us were at the sisters, his aunt's, Martin's aunt's home, spent the night. The next day we spent going from Baptist Church, Black Baptist Church to Baptist Church. We went from Beulah Baptist Church was one church that they took us to meet the people. We left there. We went to Big Bethel Baptist Church. And we also went to Ebenezer Baptist Church. That was our trip. And it was informative to us, but I did not understand the significance of it until later in life when I saw the man that Dr. Martin Luther King became. But that's something that this church did even back then, that they were aware of the historical significance of the King family. Also, at the age of I guess 17 or 18 years old, was when Reverend C.W. Huff left Bethlehem. And I don't know, I think he went back to Greene County, but we were without a pastor for a while. That's not in the history, but we were without a pastor for a period of time. But we had people here who loved this church and who were dedicated and committed, and they kept the church open. People like Mr. David Kelly, Mr. Malcolm Hardeman, Mr. Hammond, who lived out at the Hammond House, my mother, Miss Annie Banks. They all kept the church open. We would come to Sunday school. At that time, there was no central heating here. There was a stove. And we would come in, and we would be so cold. And we would say, "Oh, we are cold, Mama, we are cold." And she said, "Sing. Go ahead and sing, and you'll get warm." We were committed because our parents were committed. There were other young people here at the time who came with the people who I mentioned, and they carried on Sunday school. My mother's Sunday school superintendent. At times, I filled in for a secretary of Sunday school. We did what had to be done. So there were those who did great things. There were those who did things that are not looked at as such great things, but they were significant things. And so I thank God for that. During that time, we were looking for a pastor, and we had the blessing of Reverend E.L. Mitchell and his wife, Miss Addie Mitchell, and their children, Arlen and Edwina, came to pastor this church. And they were an educational family. They were all in education, both in education. And they were a family who loved music. They brought the arts of music to this church. And this church developed a love for music because the Mitchells would come and they would bring their instruments on the fourth Sunday. We had second and fourth Sunday service. They would bring their instruments and they would hold a concert in the afternoon on fourth Sunday. They spent the whole day in Covington, even though they lived in Atlanta, but they would come and they would stay the whole day. Most of the time they were there at the Hammond House. The Hammonds were really gracious and took care of them in the times that they had to be here all day. And after that, Reverend Mitchell began to do a lot of the things, the educational things, that drew in a lot of people. A lot of members came back, and there were new members who came in because of that. We had a lot of educators, and still do. That is a blessing for this house, blessing for this church. There were other things that were accomplished when Reverend Mitchell was here, and I'm not going to try to mention them all. I know they've been mentioned by other people, and they are written in the brief history of this church. In 1978, Pastor H.K. Benton came as our pastor. God sent him, God brought him here. He came, and he is still a beloved pastor. He's pastor emeritus now. He was a community pastor. He pastored the community and beyond. But there were things that were done here, renovations. There were additions in the dining hall. Also, there's something that I want to mention that I did not see in the brief history. It's concerning the summer feeding program that came under the leadership of Pastor H.K. Benton. The summer feeding program was brought to his attention, the idea of it by Mother Hazel Bostick, who brought it to him. And she had been praying and concerned about children who were hungry during the summer months. They didn't have the lunch that they were used to getting at school, and the summer feeding program became a reality. It was given to Minister Elizabeth Godfrey to set it up, to get it going, get it started, and she did. She did a great job, wonderful job. I know because I was there with her. She did the work, but I did whatever she asked me to do as far as helping out with the volunteering with the summer feeding program. I know she did for 2 years, but initially she set up the whole spectrum for the summer feeding program. I would watch her with this big, thick book that she kept, this file that she kept with names and dates and appointments and people to contact who helped out with the summer feeding program. This was all done under the leadership of Pastor H.K. Benton. Pastor Benton was also a great revivalist. He did a lot of revivals and traveling, and he did bring revival here. He brought great revivalists here to this church. Pastor Benton retired 3 years ago. And when Pastor Benton retired, we were looking for a pastor, and God sent a pastor after his own heart. God sent Pastor Ronnie Martin Thomas Jr. He is a man of God who loves God. He loved the people. He is an excellent teacher. He is a prolific teacher, and he is a great preacher. Preaches the word, unadulterated word. He is also a man who worships God, who believes in worship and knows that worship is the way to go straight to the heart of God. So we thank God for this pastor that we have now who came in, who heard God's voice within the first year. Within the first year, the church was renovated completely on the inside. It's beautiful. It's beautiful work that has been done. And also, because he heard God and he came to the church and brought it to the church concerning equipment, cameras and lighting and everything that we needed in order to be viral, to go viral so that the word would be able to go beyond these four walls. Because he followed the leading of the Lord and spoke to the people, and the people heard the voice of God and they responded. And little did we know, he didn't know, and we didn't know that the pandemic was going to happen. But because of the obedience of our leadership to God, we were ready. He was ready. The word was going out over the airways before the pandemic hit. And I know that we were to the good at least 2 to 3 weeks before the pandemic hit. This church was set up for viral ministry. I thank God for all who have come before us, all of the people who have worked and labored here in this church, whether it was a wooden church or whether it was just the ground on a grape arbor or a log cabin, whatever it was. I do thank God for those who have been persistent in doing the will and the work of God. And we give God honor and we give him glory and we give him praise. I did not know when I was a little girl that I came to this church. I knew that I loved the church because it was the church that my mother loved and the people. And as I have grown, I have learned to love God first and foremost. And God has raised me up to carry his word. I count it all joy, and I count it a blessing to be a minister or a reverend called reverend or minister for the gospel for Jesus Christ. I give him honor, I give him glory, and I give him praise. And I thank God for 172 years that this church has stood, and for every person that has walked through those doors, whether they were members or not. I thank God for them. And I'm asking God to continue to cover this house and keep those in leadership, those in fellowship, help the people to hear him and obey his word. Amen. Thank you, God.
Greetings. I am Kenneth O. Hardeman. I am so excited to participate in this 172nd anniversary of the Bethlehem Baptist Church, 2177 West Usher Street here in Covington, Georgia. I am a lifelong member here of Bethlehem Baptist Church. I was brought here by my parents, the late Deacon Malcolm Hardeman, and his bride, my mother, Mrs. Mother Iola Kelly Hardeman. And I like to feel that I've been here all of my life, and I've just participated in many ministries here in our church. As a youth, I sang in the junior morning glory choir, the junior choir, and the senior choir. I participated in the junior usher board, usher ministry, as the board at that time, but it's now called the junior usher ministry, under the guidance of Mrs. Mary Joyce Maxey Gaither, who was our leader at that time. I have always been actively involved in this in the church from my very beginning here. Our family members who go here is my sister Miriam Hardeman Avery, who serves in the usher ministry here. My sister Sandra Hardeman Sawyer, who served in the junior choir, and I think it was brief spell in the mid choir, who is still a membership, who is convalescent right now. But my sister Miriam still serves here actively in the usher ministry. My brother Willie Hardeman served here along with my brother Reginald Hardeman, who sang here in the Sunbeam Choir, along with Debbie Hillman, Donna Pitts, and Gwen Reese and others back in the day. But actively serving now is my sister Miriam and I, holding up the lineage of our parents, Malcolm and Iola Kelly Hardeman. It's been a good journey to be a part of this ministry, and I'm just excited that I'm a part of this 172nd anniversary. This church has a different meaning for me. My parents brought us here. I met my wife here while she was part of the usher ministry. We were married in this very room. Three of our children were baptized here under the pastor, the Reverend Hezekiah Benton Jr., and two of them were married here, Allison and Lakedra. So I thank God for these special moments that we have shared here in Bethlehem. We're thankful for those who have laid the foundation. As I look around this very room and I see the names on these windows that of those who have served here in different seasons and the families that they represent. When we joined Bethlehem, my mother joined under Reverend C.W. Huff, and our father joined from the Primitive Baptist Church in Jasper County called Muddy Creek Primitive Baptist Church Association under Pastor Reverend E.L. Mitchell. When we came to church here, there were 2 Sunday services, second and fourth Sundays. And people always ask why we have communion on the second Sunday at that time. Well, that was the first Sunday of worship in the congregation. And on the first and third Sundays, local people went to New Hope. And New Hope Baptist Church started out as a mission church from Bethlehem. So that's our sister church here in the community. So when we serve and talk about community service, that's one of our sister churches under the pastor now, Reverend Harold Miller, and his wife, who have membership here under Pastor Reverend H.K. Benton some years ago. Our church has been involved in many progressive efforts here, not only locally, but on the state level. We were one of the original members of the New Era Baptist Convention, and they would have their conventions here some years ago, and we had the privilege of having meeting Daddy King and here, who came here for the joint session and state convention that was held here in this very room. And we also have the knowledge that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., his son, would come here as a lad when his uncle, Joel King, served as pastor here at Bethlehem Baptist Church. And the late Deacon Jesse J. Clements, would often talk about that relationship that he had in knowing Reverend King and the family. Then on the locally, we were one of the original members of the Newton County Interdenominational Worship Experience, where there were church members from congregations from Grace United Methodist Church, St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church, Murray Memorial Christian Methodist Episcopal Church, New Hope Baptist Church, and at that time it was Sand Hill AOH, which is Apostolic Order of Holiness Church. And I think now they're called, their name is Jerusalem Church in the Sand Hill community. And one of the great things about the interdenominational body is that we got an opportunity to fellowship and worship with members of our community. And it was a vast and wealth experience that we learned from sharing and worshiping with others. And we didn't separate, but we joined together on the fifth Sunday. And it was a hallowed time that we look forward to, that we got to enjoy the worship experience of other congregations, and didn't think it not robbery to leave our church once a quarter to worship with our fellow members, people that we went to school with, people we lived with, people we shared in the streets with, people that we met in different facets of this community, that we could meet with them on the interdenominational body. Our church was one of the first churches in the community to add a education unit under the Reverend E.L. Mitchell and his wife, Dr. Addis Stabler Mitchell, saw a vision that he would lay the groundwork for ministry in our community, and built and erected the E.L. Mitchell Annex of our church at a cost of $58,000 in 1963, which is a milestone for that era. Now, you do the math of what it would cost to erect such a building now with today's dollars. And one of the visions that he had, that he would lay a foundation for a full-time minister to come on and activate it and serve in his community. Our church housed one of the first Head Start here in our education unit under the direction of the former Miss Cynthia Blase. And now we have a person who is part of our ministry, Debbie Hillman, who works very closely with Head Start and in educating children. So we have been involved not only just in worship experience, but in serving others here in this place called Bethlehem. As I stated, that we've done great things here over the years. It has a special place for me in here in Bethlehem, that this is the only church that I've been a member of. When I was away at college, I attended some churches, but I always called Bethlehem home. I came back to Atlanta. I served in a church when I couldn't get to Bethlehem. I like to think that I'm an interdenominational member. I went to a AME church in Fort Valley, and I went to a CME church in Atlanta, but Bethlehem was always home. And I learned from all of those worship experiences, but my foundation came here at Bethlehem. I only served under three pastors before Pastor Thomas, Reverend E.L. Mitchell, Pastor Hezekiah Benton, and interim Pastor Karen Kelly, and now serving with Reverend Ronnie Martin Thomas Jr. And I think it has been a rewarding experience of what we have are trying to do here. And I think God has really tested us during this pandemic time that we remain faithful to his cause and to his call and to his cause. As I look around these walls and I see members that on these wonders that served in a season, and then there were others who served before those that are on these wonders, and they have a story. And each one of these wonders here tell a story of families who have made contribution to this congregation. There's a listing of names. My parents' names are out on the front in the vestibule, Malcolm and Iola Hardeman. But there are so many others that are foot soldiers whose names may not be erected in the glass encasure or in the monograms on structures or even in print, but they served as well. And we thank God that he allowed us to be a part of this 172nd church anniversary here at the Bethlehem Baptist Church, 2177 Usher Street, where our doors swing open on welcome hinges, and it's a praising people serving the mighty God. We thank God for this opportunity to share in this experience. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Avis Williams, native of Newton County, Georgia, a lifelong member of Bethlehem Baptist Church. And I'm humbled to be here today to share a little bit about my family history, my own history, and a little context about a couple of other families that were friends of ours who have roots in Bethlehem Baptist Church. Again, my name is Avis Williams, and our family goes all the way back to Bethlehem's organizing and beginning in 1849. My great-great-great-grandfather's name was Tony Baker. He was born on the Jesse Baker Plantation in Oxford, Georgia, somewhere around 1837, 1836, and he became the first pastor of Bethlehem in 1850. The church was organized and called the Colored Baptist Church in 1849, and in 1850, the church has the same name as it has now, the Bethlehem Baptist Church, the House of Bread. Tony Baker became the first pastor and pastored here at Bethlehem for 46 years until 1896. He had several children. One of them was named Sarah, and she married Tom Nelson. She was born around 1861, and she was actually a little girl in the Covington area when General Sherman marched through in 1865 on his way to Savannah. She had a daughter named Maggie who married Wes Scott, and Maggie had twin daughters, or twins. One of them was a daughter named Maggie May Scott, and that was my grandmother, Miss B. She was born April 20th, 1908. And when she was born, her mom, Maggie, and the other twin died because of some influenza in the area. So Miss B grew up with her grandmother, Sarah Baker Nelson. She married Joe Williams in 1930. And in 1931, they were blessed with twin daughters, Imogene and Ernestine Williams. Imogene was my mother. She passed away last year, 3 months past her 89th birthday. They were members of Bethlehem Baptist Church. I was born in 1958. I was baptized here at Bethlehem in October of 1972. I grew up in Bethlehem, the same sanctuary, Sunday school, Sunbeam Choir, Morning Glory Choir, Junior Choir, Mitchell Gospel Choir, was actively involved in the Sunday school, all aspects of life here at Bethlehem. It's a wonderful place to be from. It has continued to grow, to nurture this community. Bethlehem has always been actively involved in ministry and other community aspects all across Newton County and across the region. When my great-great-great-grandfather finished the pastorate here at Bethlehem in 1896, he went on to help organize the Shady Grove Baptist Church in Conyers, Georgia. What a blessing. And he was up there for about 12 years until he passed away in March of 1908. Growing up here in Bethlehem, I knew Mother Annie Penn, and Miss Annie actually knew and was baptized by, so she said, Reverend Tony Baker. So she was the only person in my life that was able to reflect, remember, and recall and relate to me, our first pastor. So our family has been a member of this church for the whole 172 years. I have a piece of paperwork at my house dated around 1867 or 1868. It's a copy of the paperwork where Reverend Tony Baker was sent to the Augusta Institute, which at that time was a seminary at the Springfield Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia. Springfield would become the beginning space and place of Morehouse College before Morehouse went to Atlanta, Georgia, and was birthed in the Friendship Baptist Church in the basement. When my mother and my aunt were growing up here in Bethlehem in the 30s and 40s, they were active in the church also, were Sunday school teachers, and one of their students was then named Charlene Hunter, whose grandmother, Miss Frankie Brown, was a member here at Bethlehem. Charlene Hunter, along with Dr. Hamilton Holmes, were the first two blacks admitted to the University of Georgia. And my aunt used to keep up with Miss Hunter to become Charlene Hunter Galt of the McNair-Lair Report on PBS television. One of my mother and aunt's classmates from 1947, also a member here at Bethlehem, the late Miss Evelyn Baker, to become Evelyn Baker Hammonds. She married Mr. William Emmett Hammonds, also a member here at Bethlehem. They had two daughters, Maxine and Kathy Renee. Maxine would go on to become the dean at Harvard University, and then Renee and her husband Bob live in Evanston, Illinois right now, and they have two daughters, Adrian and Allison, who are proud graduates of Stanford and Harvard. Bethlehem has rich heritage, rich history, has always supported education, has always supported the missionary needs of the community. I'm so proud to be a member here. I accepted my calling, my active calling into ministry October 2002, preached my first sermon here at Bethlehem February 8, 2003, and I was licensed at that point after having received my certificate in theology from the Interdenominational Theological Center, Morehouse School of Religion, in 2000. In 2004, on May 30th, I was ordained right here in the historic sanctuary of Bethlehem Baptist Church with our then Pastor Emeritus Hezekiah Benton Jr. When I was baptized in 1972, our pastor was the late Reverend E.L. Mitchell. After Reverend Benton's retirement, we welcomed Pastor Karen Kelly as our interim pastor, and I had finished my master's degree at that time at Candler School of Theology. And then in 2015, I entered the doctoral program, the Doctor of Ministry program, back again at Candler School of Theology at Emory University, graduating in 2018 with my Doctor of Ministry. And while I was doing the master's program, I was blessed to start a church, Emmanuel Progressive Baptist Church, which helps to work with prisons and prisoners and prison ministries. And we're working on some appeal cases for some young men even now that are still in prison. And I was able to go out to Lake Oconee to work for Lake Oconee Community Church, where lives were being transformed in Greene and Putnam County as I worked for the church and was the pastor of community transformation. And that was 15 years ago, and still at it. I work as the community liaison now for the Putnam County Charter School System. Still loving working at church. We're so happy as we welcomed Pastor Rodney Martin Thomas 3 years ago. What a blessing he is and has been in the visionary import that he brings to our church. And it's just a joy, honor, and a privilege to work here with Bethlehem, at Bethlehem, doing ministry and doing what the Lord has called us to do, to serve our brothers and sisters. That's a little snippet of my life history, my history here at Bethlehem, and I'm so happy that we're celebrating 172 years of active history and ministry in the Covington, Newton County community, the oldest black church in Newton County. And we just thank God for this opportunity. Amen.
How many of you want the glory to rise in you and among you? Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Glory to God.
Bless your name, God. Yeah.
Hallelujah. Sing along with us as we declare we want him more than anything. Hallelujah. I lift my hands in total adoration to you. You reign on your throne, for you are God and God alone. Because of you, my cloudy days are gone, and I can sing to you this song. I just want to say that I love you more than anything. I lift my hands in total adoration unto you. You reign on the throne, for you are God and God alone. Because of you, my cloudy days are gone, and I can sing to you this song. I just want to say that I love you more than anything. Everyone declare, I lift my hands in total adoration.
I lift my hands in total adoration unto you.
You reign forever.
You reign on the throne.
For you are God and God
For
alone.
you are God and God alone. Because of you, my cloudy days are gone.
And I can sing.
I can sing to you this song.
I just want to say
that I love you more than anything.
let's declare our love words to him again. Declare, I lift my hands.
I lift my hands in total adoration unto you.
You reign forever.
You reign on your throne.
For you are God and God
For
alone.
you are God and God alone.
Because of you, all cloudy days are
Because of
gone.
you, my cloudy days are gone.
And I will sing to you.
Sing to you this song.
I just want to
I
say
just wanna say that I love you more than anything.
oh, glory to God. I love Jesus. I worship and adore you. Just want to tell you, Lord, I love you more than anything. Yes, go ahead and declare that with me. I love you. I love you, Jesus. I worship and adore you. Just want to tell you, Lord, I love